Now, what's of interest in this particular panel is that we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and blockchain. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves.
My name is Josip Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hosho Group. Hosho Group is a cybersecurity company focused on blockchain, particularly smart contract auditing and penetration testing.
Hello, my name is Karthik Swarnam. I'm responsible for information security for the AT&T Enterprise. AT&T, we have obviously mobility and mobile services, but beyond that, we do a lot of other things as well, Internet of Things. So we're definitely exploring more stuff. So.
Hello, my name is Alex Momot. I'm CEO at Remme, Access Management Solution for Enterprises.
Hi, my name is Steven Sprague. I'm CEO and founder of Rivets. And we build software that enables the trusted execution capability in your existing mobile handsets. We've just recently done a deal with Telefonica to enable a dual root of trust phone where half your private key is held in the SIM and half your private key is held in the trusted execution environment. So it'll be the first time we really have separate supply chains for the protection of a private key. And we're in the process of how do we enable a crypto-capable wallet on their 350 million handsets.
Vince Romney, I was the senior cybersecurity analyst for the ground-based strategic deterrent at BAE Systems and also the CTO of SK2 Tech, another cybersecurity company. We were focused on three-factor authentication in the IAM space and then session-based data at rest encryption.
So gentlemen, really what I would like to start with is this. I'd like to help me understand, as well as those who are listening, what are some of the current issues with cybersecurity?
The list is enormous, right? So I think the biggest fundamental situation is I think predominantly the traditional and conventional cybersecurity revolves around a centralized store and a centralized approach, right? And technically it kind of involves a middleman. Somebody has to go check the policy and kind of institute that, right? So if you don't have that access back into it, the ability to kind of validate what's going wrong or how do you know at any given time, dynamically knowing what's going on in your environment becomes a challenge. So I think that that's what has been exploited from a man-in-the-middle perspective as well, right? So I think that's one of the primary challenges, I would say, in a general context.
I'd like to try and simplify the problem because I think the problem is very straightforward. The fundamental problem we have today is that we are trying to create an information sharing network on top of an unknown compute. So fundamentally, our architecture for the last 30 years has been known user, unknown compute. And it stemmed from a day where security was based on your compute and your services were in a building. And contrary to popular opinion, the users have left the building, and now the applications have left the building. And so now we have users at Starbucks using cloud services, and all of the network security is in the building. And so we have not transitioned yet from the old sort of 1970s, 1980s network security model to a world that's built on an identity-based model for compute. We've taken enormous steps in industry to try and invest in this. There are 1.8 billion computers that have a TPM chip on the motherboard of your PC. We haven't turned them on yet. Blockchain came along at an interesting time where it has the potential to replace what has been a very hard to manage and deploy system of PKI certificates and credentials with a new model for a fabric of how the chain of keys interact. And so we call it a trustless network. It really means it's a network without an operator. And so it becomes an available fabric for the true central player in all of blockchain to work, because all of blockchain is centralized around one entity, and that entity is the owner of the private key. And so the owner, all of blockchain is there to serve one God, the owner of the private key. And as we think of it in that way, we move from a network-centric model to a device and user-centric model, and that transition has a prayer to help us in what has been a failed model in cybersecurity of trying to manage the control based on who connects.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In the context of blockchain, private key management is definitely one of the largest problems that we face right now in cybersecurity, is just that users or companies or entities that have to keep their private keys secure have a difficult time doing so, and a difficult time understanding how they should go about doing so.
I'm going to just quickly add to that. I think one of
Please
the
do.
things that has come out in the last couple of years is the element of identity, and I don't mean just who you are as a user, but who you are as a person. The recent disclosures of data that are out there mean that we are all public domain. Our social security numbers are public domain, our addresses, our houses, what we paid for our house, our bank accounts, that's all public domain. So identity has to become a central function to that user-centric model. And getting identity to the point where it's 100% known, because at any one point in time, somebody else can become me right now and effectively be me, because there's enough data out there to allow that to happen. We need to create an environment over time, and it's not going to be a quick fix, where that becomes something that you actually are the domain owner of all those artifacts of your data.
Alex?
And I want to add that I think that now the biggest problem is human.
Human.
Yeah, not human itself, but human factor, because of complexity of systems that we have today. So our future should be building much more simpler systems for the final user. So they will not make all that mistakes like passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's all.
Why did you give my password away?
Right, but we already did this, right? So how many people have a cell phone, right? So when you get to Paris and you get off the airplane, is there a big sign at the end of the runway that says the password for Paris is this today? No, it just works. Roaming is a fantastic model. It's an identity-based compute model. It's called mobile. We're here at an IoT conference. What's IoT?
And blockchain.
Yes, but it's interesting. IoT is where services are delivered based on the identity of the device, but the primary protocol is messaging. Blockchain is a device identity network where the primary protocol is messaging. You don't authenticate in blockchain. There are no authentications. They are encrypted messages. So next to me is a gentleman who plays around with things like the nukes. Watch Crimson Tide. Crimson Tide is a fantastic consumer simplistic story of where we send a message and the message is an instruction. In this case, the submarine in Crimson Tide is the chain. It's supposed to get the message and follow the instructions. The whole movie is about the humans running around going, should we follow the message or it's not properly signed? Should we follow the not properly signed message? No, right? But that's the challenge, is we're moving to a messaging-based model wrapped around identity, which really eliminates or reduces the human factor component dramatically.
Right, but one of the things that you have all brought up in this is that the idea that identity is really the keystone to all of this. How are we going to solve these identity issues? I mean, what is the solution that is out there? Because without the proper identity, so that you're not actually, punked or anything like that, how are you going to actually ensure that who you're dealing with is actually them?
So for us, we're working on a program called Project Verify, which is a cross-carrier program where we can identify a user based on their behavioral patterns, and then those things get appended to that identity, right? That identity gets built over a period of time on various actions, and that kind of can defines who the user is, per se. So there's more authentication and attribution factors behind that user, per se, right?
Those are behavioral, though, items. So are you trying to be introducing like biometrics or things like that?
So when what Steve was talking about is when you land, you're not asking a password in Paris, right? So by way of somebody walking in and what is a normal user behavior and what are the behavioral changes,
All
you'll
right,
be able to do
I
that.
have to step in. I'm sorry. The reason it works is because we have a SIM chip, which is effectively a hardware wallet in your phone that logs your behind in every time you connect to a tower. Now, it turns out that we have one key in that, and it tracks you everywhere you go. It turns out when you go to Europe, they give you an extra key. You actually get a fake key, so you can't track you the next time you go back to Europe. It's a privacy thing. But fundamentally, I'm not interested in voyeurism. By the way, all the sensors he just articulated can be hacked. The camera in your phone is not safe. There are no drivers between the image that took place in the camera on your phone and the thing that processed the image is an unsafe channel that can have easily the data replaced. This idea that somehow unknown sensors, again, unknown compute. So I have 10 unknown computers tracking me. They're unknown. What do they know? Nothing. Can they be spoofed? Yes. They're just complicated because I have 10 of them. So what? I have a very high power processor in a phone that can easily pretend to be 10 sensors at the same time because it's getting all the sensor data anyway and replay me. So it's an enormously interesting challenge, but we want to move to tamper-resistant storage of keys in hardware. Why hardware? Because we can detect whether it's been changed or not. So we need to move to a model of measured compute. What measured compute is that when an instruction comes out of a device, it's a known device in a known condition with known controls. And I specifically use the word known because the word known isn't defining a specific technical term. It's known to a certain quality level. And so you want an identity of this quality that is producing an instruction. That quality is what helps us to make the decision that a transaction's getting done.
Okay. So, Kartik, can you finish your thought?
No, I think it's similar, right? So basically, you are authenticating every single attribute coming in here. You're not just taking the data alone, but you have to make sure that the content is also continuously changing, right? You need to validate it. You need to make sure it is tamper-proof from an encryption perspective. The mechanism in which you can give an authenticity for the data that gets in, right? But the data gets also built over a period of time. That's kind of what I was going to say.
Sure. Yo, do you have a question? I'll come to you, Vincent.
I mean, as far as like identity goes, I mean, like I'm kind of like the pessimist in the sense that like people are always going to figure out ways to break everything that exists presently. So the more contextual data that you can stack onto things, like if you are using a device and you have like a secure, trusted environment on there that you're storing, identity or keys, and that you stack other factors like biometrics and geolocation data and whatever extra layers that you can, usually in like a multi-factor auth kind of scenario, helps provide a greater level of confidence that your identity is in fact your own. But at the end of the day, I think that if someone's going to try hard enough, they're going to be able to break it.
All right, Vincent.
So on top of that, and I love where this conversation is going because it really is getting down to some of the nitty-gritty of what technology has to be able to support. One of those elements that it has to support, though, is those data artifacts that make me who I am. And it has to be able to support those in a protected environment, because once something, a fingerprint or an iris scan, becomes data, it becomes something I can steal. If I'm a good, aggressive hacker, I will find a way to become your fingerprint if that's a data element I have access to and can utilize in that authentication stream. So it's getting to a point, and this is one of those challenges I throw out to the blockchain community, is putting an environment together where the data artifacts are things that I control and authorize use for. I authorize use for my social or my fingerprint or my iris scan or whatever in a way that comes from those trusted computing modules that I hold. Okay, that's one of those things that I think will ultimately get there, but it's a challenge to throw out to the blockchain community. Let's make it happen.
Alex, what are your thoughts about this? Do we have a solution in place?
Yes. First of all, I want to agree with all people before me that we should have not only device-based identity, but also human-based or biometry-based, because 2 factors or 3 factors is always better than 1. And we could make it via trusted environment, but we should provide ability for users to store identity on their side, so they will control their data, and servers will rely on blockchain as a source of trust for providing the actual state of this data to the server, instead of relying on centralized servers where this data could be stored like it works today.
Okay, so in essence what we have now is we have the endpoint, the destination that we want to get to. So how are we going to actually migrate from where we are today with untrusted devices, untrusted identity, to a point where we actually have that? Let's start with you, Steve, because I think that you're very loquacious.
Well, so actually a lot of that technology is available today. If you go ask ARM, is Trust Zone built into an ARM processor? The answer is yes. How many of the demonstrations we see in this room, whether blockchain or IoT or cloud, are based off of ARM? They have a secure core within the ARM processor. So does Intel, so does AMD. So the technology is already in the silicon. Then we need to move up that process step.
Wait. You say if it's already there, why aren't we using it?
Well, because we all think like we're in the 1980s and that we should be able to use any device, right? How many people build an infrastructure and say, as part of the design process, we expect it to be run on any device? So we're going to do a home banking app, and the home banking app should run on any device. So let me qualify any device. I'd like you to use this North Korean provisioned computer, which is designed to steal every single aspect of everything you do, replicate it, and it is designed to remove all of your money. Okay, most people will go, well, any device but that one. And that's where the problem becomes. Because today we're actually using, mentally, in almost everything we do, any device. And yet we've had this new wonderful thing that's come along called personal computing. And the way you test personal computing, it's really simple. Take somebody's phone, just put it in your hand and hold it there. You know, if we got everybody in the audience to do this, like take the person next to you's phone and hold it. And it makes everybody in the room uncomfortable. There's a signal that runs up your spine that goes, holy crap, somebody else is holding my phone. This is a biological-based AI cybersecurity training event that assures that cybersecurity has been trained into us by our mothers from the time we were like 18 months old, and they gave us like a bunny that said, don't lose your bunny, right? And that's what personal computing is. So the most important thing when we tie credentials to your device is that you become aware when you lose your device. If you lose your passwords, hell, the Chinese have had your passwords for years. Just the question is whether they've used them or not.
Alex, what are your thoughts about this?
I think that the device should be, we should have something in device that could be revoked. And if you talk about biometry, the big problem with biometry that it can't be transferred to other server, because if you will lose your biometry once, it means that you will become some sort of lost identity person. So if we could use something like a digital passport instead of traditional passport issued by the government, you will be able to revoke it and you will be able to issue a new one. And that will help using various devices during all our regular life, because usually we change a phone or our laptop during 1 year or 2 years, and we should perform this procedure after a certain period of time. And we should be able to transfer all our data, and we should understand that we will be able to do that, because once I wake up in the morning and I notice that my Google Authenticator somehow stopped working, and I have no keys for Google Authenticator, so I should contact all my crypto exchanges to restore my account. It was a very big problem for me. I spent a lot of time for making that. And right now I understand that traditional systems like Google Authenticator or any kind of 2FA that sticks to one device and for some backup codes, and you have 1,000 of these passwords and all of that, is not proper way for operating with your accounts. So that's...
Okay, so what is the solution? Actually, Vince, let's come up with you.
Okay, I'm going to say there is not a solution. There is a pathway to a solution.
Okay, so what's the next 3 steps?
I think one of the key steps was just called out. There is technology, there is silicon right now that supports things that we aren't leveraging. Let's start to leverage those environments that allow us to take a step forward in securing just processing data as we're functioning that.
Okay, so we know that we have this, but we're not actually utilizing it. Hang on, Steve. We got to share the stage here. So, Kartik, so what is AT&T, for example, doing in this particular realm?
I think we have the technology, right? I think the quality of the data that needs to go into that technology, I mean, that's very much important, right? So I think we're learning and we're building that, attribute tree and then attribute chain, and that way you have a lot more attributes to go off of, right? I think you need to be able to get that, and to everybody else's point, right? I think it's are you trying to build everything for everything, or are you trying to use some of the secure and more, system that you can trust, right, based on the type of technology that you can use, and that way you can store it in an appropriate manner, and you know that you can trust that part of it, right? So.
Right. So, tell me then, how is it that we are in a society where we want permissibility in terms of using any device that we want, and yet we still have this need for security, especially cybersecurity, and how is blockchain actually going to help us on that?
How is blockchain actually going to help? Well, I'm not exactly sure necessarily where blockchain will come in. I think there are a few different places where it could be used, like to either check like integrity or potentially keep track of maybe like if there is like an identity system that is like fully functional with like a well-known trusted execution system that everything could be managed there. But I mean, like at the end of the day, like I feel like just developing towards all of these security concerns that people want is just difficult because like if you're implementing a specific type of encryption, you're like, all right, like unless you have an immense amount of experience with cryptography and a lot of other people checking, you're supposed to do like very specific sets of things, AES, with this type of padding, with this type of cipher suite or whatever. And I think it's kind of the same thing with even these trusted execution environments. To kind of answer your question is like, why aren't we using them now? Is because like it's not like a regular mobile developer necessarily knows how to get access to those SDKs and like go through a vendor like Trustonic or something like that and figure out how to get access to those.
Okay, so one of the questions one of the issues that you've all brought up is this idea of management of the identity. Who's going to do that? Is this going to be a government issued thing? And let's get Vince. He's our government expert here. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, first off, no, don't go there. Again, the point, yeah.
Wait. You would trust it, though, to a corporate entity?
I would trust it to the concept of a distributed ledger doing the validation of the integrity of data points. Because at that point, I have an immutable model to follow. It can't be modified. Now, the challenge that I say, who's going to do that?
Right, somebody has to do it. It has to be a business model.
I mean, I've come across maybe 5 companies right now that are in the identity space in blockchain. They're working on the project right now. Some of them are taking really interesting tacks with it. Some are taking very simplistic tacks. I'm not sure where that's going to win out. But I think that is who's going to do it? It's going to be innovators in the space that are looking at that model and saying, identity was lost because we had Equifaxes. We had entities that were private industry, that were not controlled, and I say private industry-esque, that were not controlled, that were not validated, that weren't tested. We now have an environment where, if properly implemented, the blockchain allows a way to validate externally. Okay, we can see that is correct. The people that get there first, hopefully will have done it right, but hopefully, that's a to be seen. But those are the companies that are going to get there, and I think it's really a question of the innovators getting there faster than somebody who says, no, we're going to control it all.
Okay, Steve, what are your thoughts on this?
So I'll say 2 things. One, in the answer to your previous question, is it available today? Yeah, if you want to go play with it on Samsung phones, there's a 2-factor authenticator running in trust execution from Rivets. And in first quarter, it'll run on 750 million handsets. In hardware, with backup, with multiple keys, portable across multiple devices. So the parts are there to go build this. Identity, who's going to control identity? I think the more interesting question is not who grants the identity, but who accepts it. So in the blockchain space today, there's a huge KYC problem, know your customer. And everybody's having to go to KYC and we're like waving our passports on YouTube, like really? And so the real question is, when does Malta or Cayman or the US government willing to accept an Estonian national government digitally signed credential to supply an application to open an account? And so I think actually the problem is one of an acceptance side, not a creation side. We have plenty, so let's pick one like a U.S. Defense Department credential signed by the process of US DOD, US DOD PKI. Can I open an exchange account on Cayman Islands with a US DOD backed PKI by just digitally signing the form? Or if not, why is that identity somehow better if I take my US passport and wave it in front of a YouTube screen with my smiling face and say, look, these match, and some person on the other end. It's the smile,
it's the
absolutely.
smile.
And so I think that's an interesting challenge is we have to get to acceptance of the digital identity. We actually have tens and tens of millions of digital identities already issued. That little chip in your passport is a digital identity.
Right, but that's already being accepted elsewhere. You can use that passport. it depends on where you're using it. So it's a qualitative aspect. Where can you actually use this? And not a quantitative, meaning it's universally accepted. Alex, what are your thoughts here?
I think that proper architecture should be blockchain as a source of trust and identity that is controlled by the user. The only problem is that a lot of governments, a lot of corporations should trust the blockchain as a source of trust, but we now have a situation that after 10 years everybody recognizes Bitcoin as a digital gold. So I think during next decade we will have a government that recognize blockchain as a proper source of trust, and it will be a public blockchain, not a private blockchain, because if we are long in the space, we understand that private blockchain is not a blockchain at all, it's just a database, and we just need time for recognizing of all that old entities that are quite slow, that blockchain could really be the proper source of information, and they will rely on that system, and they will understand that the future, that each human on the planet will want to save their identity on their device or on some their systems that will be controlled only by that human.
Kartik, is there an example that you can think of where there are going to be this universal blockchain that will provide identity for everyone?
I don't know about a universal example though, right? I think the distributor ledger concept is a great thing, right? So I think everybody writes into it and it's been signed and it's been authenticated so everybody else can. So I think the best part about that would be, I think, more evolution in terms of various industries, right? If it's healthcare, there might be a consortium that kind of gets into that area. If it's in the banking, so I think it's going to eventually get into a one common public environment, but I think it's going to start with various, industries.
So it's going to be sector driven?
Probably, most likely, yeah.
Yo?
Sure. I mean, I could see maybe something like, almost like a new version of OpenID or something with the blockchain as the verification mechanism, or even smart contracts on top of a blockchain being the management of where you allow your information or where you allow yourself to be identified by.
Vincent?
Just one caveat that goes with this is as governments continue to pass legislation like GDPR and other Privacy Act legislation, as we look at blockchain as an immutable record, that flies in the face if it's an actual personal data point that is sitting on the blockchain it flies in the face of the regulations. So there's this neat little conundrum we find ourselves in is blockchain going to be the location of the identity, or is it going to be a repository of the validation of the integrity of the identity? And I think it's the latter. The integrity is going to be what's validated on the blockchain. The personal identity artifacts can't really be there if we are going to consider things like GDPR and other regulations.
So it's important to understand in blockchain that we're missing a huge piece of it, right? So data on a chain is immutable. We just cannot prove the data on the chain was intended. So that if all we have is a chain and we go to court and we say, this data was written on September 15th at 5:31 p.m., we can prove that. It's a fantastic notary. However, we have no evidence on chain as to the quality of the protection of the thing that wrote the data. And so what would benefit us tremendously in blockchain is if we were to add a second hash. And the second hash is the evidence that this device in this condition with these controls subject to these GDPR controls, et cetera, kind of anything the owner wants to assert, is bound into the transaction. So now at a future date, I can prove in partnership with the owner of the platform, which is what protects privacy. So then with the owner of the platform, I can assert that this device in this condition with these controls wrote this transaction at this time.
The governments have recognized at a lower level currently, hopefully at a higher level, that they've failed epically in maintaining control of identity. That's gone, okay? Even in the military. I held a TSSCI clearance. That was gone when the OPM breach happened. Now, my clearance was there, but everyone else had my clearance information. They had my fingerprints. They knew my best friends in high school. That's all on the dark web, folks. And if you held a clearance at any time and you were part of that OPM breach, it's out there. Thank you. Appreciate that. But the reality is they've failed. There are opportunities in business to get that back in a way of control. and I think this is where the discussion ends, is we have an opportunity with blockchain to create that integrity validation. There's companies I've talked with, I've consulted with one that is working on a, kind of a KYC evolving into own your own data particles, your own elements, so that you control the release of those, and they've got a transactional model around it. It's an interesting approach. It may work, but the reality is I think it's back to this idea. We get this community going in it, and it becomes a community-backed, value-based proposition. That will become the impetus.
All right, so here's then a question for you as the panelist, and I'll start with you, Yo, and that is, what is the most immediate impact that blockchain is making on security?
I mean, the biggest thing is just the fact that it's immutable, and that with sufficient hashing power and stuff, that you believe that data is unalterable. Because in some ways, it's like the ability to add truth. Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you believe the data going onto the blockchain is valid or not. But it's the fact that it can't be changed in any fashion. There's a lot of definite security benefits around that. And then I guess a lot of these just companies that are popping up that are trying to leverage that facet of blockchain technology to add some sort of layer to record keeping or anything else that they're trying to improve.
Kartik?
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually provides a solution from any issues that may arise from a man-in-the-middle type attack, right? And then, so when you think about it, there's opportunities I think tactically speaking, like domain name service, lookup services, and things like that. So that's some of the areas where I think there will be immediate benefits in terms of having the immutable record that's in a distributed ledger that anybody can look into it. May not be as critical, but critical from a business perspective, right? So.
Okay, Alex?
I think most common words, it's immutability and transparency of the data. And if consensus mechanism works properly in blockchain, its participants could guarantee that the data is original and no fakes is possible.
Steve?
I think it's super simple. We're giving everybody keys for the first time. So finally, when you think of a spend transaction in crypto of any kind, not only did you transfer value, but you opened an account at the same time. Because in the fact of transferring the value, you demonstrated control of a private key, and you gave the receiver a public key while you transferred the value. And so we just established a full, proper public key, private key relationship for 30 million people with wallets to services. And so fundamentally, the thing we're doing is we're delivering you for the first time e-commerce. I'm sorry it's taken 30 years. But fundamentally, what blockchain is going to deliver, if all aspects of blockchain fail, we will have taught the world how to begin the process of having true e-commerce, which will improve all of our daily lives when we go shopping on Amazon and every other service, and that we reduce fraud, make a simpler and safer experience, and increase the value of the subscriber's relationship.
I'm going to take a different tack on how blockchain has affected security. I think what it has done, from my perspective, is highlighted the fact that there is a lack of security currently being applied on the onboarding and offboarding process of the blockchain. So yes, everything that was said all down the line is correct. But blockchain also highlighted that if I'm an attacker, I'm not going to try to hack the blockchain. That's stupid. But it's really smart to hack the onboarding or offboarding process, because that's where the vulnerability lies. And that has become highlighted in all of the past 3 years of great hacks. I mean, honestly, that's what got me interested in blockchain, was all the hacks. I really didn't care about it until then, and then I started getting very interested in it. But that is why I think cybersecurity in the environment is growing now, and people are paying attention, because that highlighted it. No longer was the actual value something to hack. You had to hack it before it got on the chain.
So thank you for ruining my last question. So, no, the question I'm going to follow up with is so we recognize what the problem is. We seem to have a direction to it. We recognize that there's a need for at least a central authenticating authority that has to be created. So what are the challenges to getting to that point? I mean, is it a platform issue? Is it a transaction speed issue? Is it a network issue? What is the challenges to actually achieve this utopia? Alex, let's start with Alex. Let's do Kartik. Then we're going to do Vince, Chris, and then we'll end with you.
A few years ago, I listened to some guy from Consensus about let's put every transaction on chain, so it will give a value for Ethereum and so on. And my thought was it's a not proper way for example, identity services, because it will be some time where it will be very hard to perform all the transactions. And we got the situation with CryptoKitties. So after that...
Right, 30% of the entire transactions was for that game.
Yeah, network completely stopped in the days. So now Ethereum tried to make all transactions off-chain. So I think that the biggest issue is a proper architecture. Because blockchain is a very good system when you properly design the system from the very beginning, not after it is deployed. So for example, we could make a single transaction for creating identity and read that using Blockchain Explorer multiple times without any kind of 10,000 transactions per second or millions transactions per second, because we don't need that. In reality, we could use even Bitcoin blockchain as a source of trust with kind of storing mechanism from any kind of other common public blockchain. So if we have proper architecture, we'll solve a lot of problems with scalability, with fast transactions, and all of that.
Kartik?
Yeah, I think one of the things is obviously educating every technologist in the organization, trying to see how this can be applied. Number one. Number two, I think picking the right use cases if you want to start somewhere, right, from an organizational perspective. Either it is private or a public blockchain concept. So.
Yo?
I definitely agree with Alex that the architectural problems with the current blockchains is really inhibited right now. I mean, most of the software it still feels like very alpha or beta stage. I mean, we're still finding bugs on a very regular basis, and even Bitcoin and Ethereum. So I think that from a software perspective, that's definitely one of the challenges, is figuring out how do we make it work for more sophisticated applications, and how do we basically identify the problems that we haven't even encountered yet when it is ready to handle those more sophisticated applications.
Okay, Steve?
So we've been focused on attacking just one of the component problems, which is how do we assure that mobile devices have a standard capability for a crypto wallet in hardware with multiple roots of trust, so we're not trusting a single supply chain. We've been focused on enabling the carriers to participate in this because we're all customers of carriers today worldwide. And so we're focused on how do we provide the infrastructure, support, technology that bring the next billion hardware wallets online in the next few years. And when I say next few years, the first versions of this will ship in first and second quarter of next year. So watching this space, there literally are hundreds of millions of devices enabled. It's to use an analogy, think of going to 10 years of multimedia conferences, and then all of a sudden Microsoft ships multimedia as a standard driver set and capability in every PC. And we just have an expectation that when I send an MP3 file to grandma, it will play on the computer. And we need that capability, we believe, within the hardware device to have a standard hardware wallet capability. It is not intended to store $1 billion on your mobile phone. That's a bad idea. But you should be able to store thousands of dollars extremely safely. And it should be proper that the user cannot lose their keys. More is lost because people lose their keys than they're stolen. And so we have just as much work on the consumer experience and how we back things up and recover them and make it simple as we do in providing true world-class isolation and protection.
So to your original question, I think there's another discussion that is not really born for this particular day, but it is something that should be in the back of our minds. And that is we are currently operating on the original TCP/IP stack. At some point, that really does need to change. We were working in the military for proprietary network stacks. within highly controlled environments, because those are areas we did not want to have that capability. That's currently ongoing. That's a current model, is to develop a completely different stack so that an attacker gets in there, they've got to define the stack before they can even come up with an attack. The modern world isn't modern if we're operating on a 40-year-old stack. So that's something that has to happen in the future. I don't know when that's going to happen. I know there's people working on it, but that's a very large-scale challenge. And I think the person that, the group that comes together and develops a stack that can be seamlessly integrated into the communication channels of TCP/IP, but is in fact a more secure stack, will be a very interesting solution.
All right, thank you, panelists. We ran out of time. Thank you for all watching this panel and its discussion.